Welcome back, everyone. Let's just dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating family dynamic centered around what's known as the Mercury fifth house conflict. Now, if you're not super deep into astrology, here's the quick rundown. Mercury, that rules how we communicate. And the fifth house? Well, that rules children, self-expression, and the ego. So when these specific energies clash, wow. If you've ever felt like your living room has suddenly morphed into a high-stakes courtroom or a debate stage, you are absolutely going to want to pay close attention to this. We're going to bridge this intellectual divide that so often opens up between parents and kids so we can figure out exactly why these communication breakdowns happen and, more importantly, how we can actually fix them.
Seriously, why does every single conversation feel like a debate? It's just an exhausting reality for so many of us. You ask a totally simple question, maybe about how school was or if they finished a chore, and suddenly, bam, you're locked in a 20-minute high-stakes rhetorical battle. I mean, it can literally feel like your kid went out and hired a defense attorney just to talk about their day. It is incredibly common for these really simple conversations to just escalate into full-blown arguments, leaving us parents feeling totally confused and honestly pretty drained. But what's actually driving this sudden, intense urge to argue?
Section 1. When kids become debaters, challenging the status quo.
So the core issue really kicks off when children start developing and very actively voicing opinions that are vastly different from your own. The tension really starts to bubble up the second your child begins to question your family's beliefs, traditions, or just everyday assumptions way more often than you'd expect. And look, we're not just talking about a toddler refusing to eat their vegetables here. This is a much deeper questioning of the established viewpoints that have basically governed your household for years. When the foundational rules and traditions of your family are suddenly shoved under a microscope by your kid, naturally that creates a massive amount of tension in the home.
And these battles usually play out across some pretty massive, complex life topics. We're talking worldview, politics, career choices, technology, spirituality, or even lifestyle decisions. Through these constant intellectual sparring matches over these specific topics, your child is actually learning how to defend their opinions. They become highly articulate and, as you probably noticed, highly argumentative. They are basically running themselves through a rigorous debate boot camp right in your living room, using these major life themes as their personal training ground.
Section 2. The conflict trap. Logic contests and misunderstandings.
Okay, we really need to dive under the hood here to explore the deeper friction at play. Because sure, on the surface it feels super combative, but a totally crucial point to grasp is that these arguments don't spark because you or your child are trying to be hostile toward one another. Not at all. They happen because both of you desperately, and I mean desperately, want your own viewpoint to be understood by the other person. You're both just digging your heels in, not to hurt each other, but out of this deep, fundamental human craving to feel heard and validated by the person sitting across from you.
But right here is exactly where the parental instinct kicks in. And, spoiler alert, it's a trap. It's the compulsion to correct. As a parent, you probably feel this overwhelming urge to explain, correct, or challenge your child's ideas, right? Even when they're just trying to express themselves. Maybe they're just thinking out loud or exploring a weird new concept. That parental instinct flares right up. You want to guide them. You want to fix the flawed logic. So what do? You jump right in with a correction.
And unfortunately, that compulsion totally shatters the connection. The difference really comes down to listening to respond versus listening to understand. Misunderstandings almost always arise specifically because we're listening just to formulate our next response, rather than listening to truly understand where the other person is coming from. And this is especially true during those emotionally charged conversations. When you're just sitting there waiting for your turn to talk so you can drop your correction, the dialogue completely breaks down.
Which brings us right to the ultimate trap, when these interactions devolve into actual contests of logic. I mean, think about that phrase for a second. In a logic contest, what is the primary goal? It's winning. In these heated moments, being right suddenly becomes far, far more important than actual understanding. The conversation isn't about connecting with your child anymore. It becomes completely about proving your point and winning the debate.
Moving on to Section 3, the intellectual divide, the push for autonomy. So, we've looked at the parent's compulsion to correct, but to actually bridge this gap, we have to pivot and look at the child's internal perspective. It all comes down to intellectual independence. As parents, we frequently underestimate just how strongly our kids value forming, holding, and vigorously defending their own unique viewpoints and ideas. Guys, this isn't just a teenage phase. It is a vital, absolutely crucial developmental trait. They are actively trying to build their own mind, completely separate from yours. And when we underestimate how important that process is to them, we hit a massive roadblock.
And here's the direct cause and effect of underestimating that independence. When a child's need for autonomy is ignored, parental advice suddenly feels like an instruction. You might genuinely think you're just offering a helpful suggestion, about their career choices or their screen time. But to a child who is fiercely guarding their new intellectual independence, your advice feels like a strict top-down command. And what is the natural human response to an unwanted instruction? Fierce, immediate resistance, every single time.
Which leads us to our final section, Section 4. Curiosity over correction, shifting the dynamic.
Okay, so we've mapped out the conflict, the logic traps, and the push for autonomy. But how do we actually bridge this gap in our own homes? Well, it all starts with one incredibly powerful realization. Wisdom is not proven through debate. Seriously, let that sink in for a second. Realizing this is the deeper lesson of this entire dynamic. Being right, winning the logic contest, proving your point, none of that actually proves you are wise. And more importantly, none of that builds a better, closer relationship with your child.
So the blueprint for success here is actually pretty simple. Stronger relationships emerge when curiosity replaces correction. When you can consciously replace that knee-jerk parental urge to immediately correct a flawed argument and instead approach it with genuine curiosity about why your child thinks the way they do, the entire dynamic shifts. It is like night and day. Understanding simply has to become more important to you than winning the argument. I want to leave you all with this final provocative thought today. In your very next family conversation, when the tension inevitably rises and the topics get a little heavy, what are you going to do? Will you choose to win the argument, or will you choose to understand the person? It is a choice you have to make every single time you talk. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep this question in your back pocket, and I'll catch you next time.